It's now my pleasure to introduce our main speaker, Tim A. from Laguna Beach.
People! Yeah! Tag team music in full effect.
Wow. Walk-on music. Hi, my name's Tim Ayers, and I'm an alcoholic. Absolutely grateful to be here in San Buenaventura. Not many of you know that's the name of this place. And it really is. It's really great. And I want to thank Scott for asking me up. And Derek, you did such a fabulous job. And Tom, you know, structure is what this meeting's about, but it's also about not being a glum lot. And I felt that when I walked in. I felt the positive energy of this group. And I'm grateful for groups like this. Grateful for groups like this, because our friends Paul and Mark are going to have an opportunity to sit in here tonight, and the heat's off. The heat's off. And I hope, Paul and Mark, you understand you're with people who understand exactly the way you're feeling. I get that. I get that, you know, and we're here at the Christmas time, and, you know, and I was out in Indio last Friday night, and they're not a glum lot either. They're not a glum lot. It's a little rough and tumble kind of crowd, and they do the meeting the way they want to do it, and you do the meeting the way you want to do it, and that's the fourth tradition. That's the fourth tradition in action, that in each group is allowed to do it the way they want to do it, as long as they don't negatively impact other groups or AA as a whole. And so you've come together and you've got a pretty much full room on a Saturday night between Christmas and New Year's. And that's an achievement in Alcoholics Anonymous today, because it seems like there's just some other better things to be doing. At least that's what I've seen as I've gone around to the various groups. And so I'm glad that we're here amongst each other at a good time of the year. And, you know, last year, in the middle of December, I was in Seneca Falls, New York, because I wanted to go to the It's a Wonderful Life conference that they have there. It's a Wonderful Life festival, because I'm a big fan of the movie. I used to watch the movie and drink box wine and cry. And a couple of weeks ago, it was showing at the small theater in my town, Laguna Beach, and I went and saw it again. And I'm always touched by that movie in my sobriety, because if you watch the movie, it's the story of a man who goes through his life wanting something more, wanting something else, and not being content. And things don't play out the way he wants them to play out as a result of circumstances that he can't control, and he ends up in a bar. And he's had too much to drink. And he does that thing that most of us have done. I know I did it. He was sitting at that bar. He says this prayer. God, I don't know if you're up there, but please help me. He wanders out of that bar and goes to a bridge. Thinks he's better off dead. He's going to jump off that bridge, and I know what that feels like. My friend Darren from Santa Barbara talks about that feeling. And an angel jumps in, and then he jumps in to save the angel. And we got a lot of angels in Alcoholics Anonymous. They're called sponsors. They jump in, and, you know, we're all here to save each other. And they get out of the water, and they, you know, get on their way, and the angel shows George what it would be like if he was never really here. And at the end, he runs back to the bridge, and he says that prayer that a lot of us have said, and I hope you say it tonight, particularly our friend Paul and our friend Mark, because the prayer that he says at that moment when he's back on the bridge is, God, I want to live again. God, I want to live again. And that's what Alcoholics Anonymous has done for me. And I understand what Linda was talking about when she says, you know, I haven't been the best on some days. And I'm still flawed. And I've made a lot of mistakes in my sobriety. But the one thing that I have been able to do is I've been able to keep coming back. And I'm grateful for that. you know. And I'm standing up here and I got 15 days. I got 15 days. And I got 10 months. And I got 23 years. And I was taught to count that way by a fellow out of the South Bay. Some of you may have known him. It's Dave Barge. He's not with us anymore. But Dave out of the South Bay cornered me very early in my sobriety out at what we used to call the Desert Powwow, and now we call it the Desert Roundup. And Dave cornered me, asked me how much time I had, and I told him. And he told me how he counted his days first, and then he counted his months, and then he counted his years. And he told me, he said, Tim, if you count your time that way, your days first, then your months, then your years, then you'll be close to the people who are brand new. So if you fellas are in your first, second, or third meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and this is all new to you, welcome. The answer is here. We got the answer to your drinking problem. We got the answer to your living problem. But Dave also said, you know what? You'll be close to the people who are just coming back. So if you're coming back and you've given this thing a try and it didn't seem to work out, that's no problem. That's no problem. Because you're the bravest people in Alcoholics Anonymous. Because you've come and you've heard the message, and maybe it worked for 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, and you went out and you gave it another try. Book says maybe that's what we need to do. Doesn't want anyone to be harmed, but maybe you need to give it another try to see if you have what I have. Because you see, when I take the drink takes the drink, and I'm off and running. When I take the drink takes the drink, and I'm off and running. And it takes me to jail, and it takes me to blackouts, and it takes me to broken relationships and disappointed parents, and for some of us, blameless children who've been harmed by our behavior. That's the thing that I've got. And it talks about it in the doctor's opinion. It's that allergy. It's that phenomenon of craving. It's the thing that's different about me that most people don't have. And then I got this other thing. I always think it's going to be different next time. I get a day, I get 2 days, I get a week away from the drink. Friday comes, forgot what I said to him, forgot what I did to them, and what I said to his wife. And I pick up. Because I've got that problem. If we didn't read it tonight, at least, I was so consumed by self that I didn't really hear it. Maybe we did read it. But, I didn't hear chapter 3. But at our meeting down in Laguna Beach tonight, they're going to read chapter 3, the first part, that tells me that I'm the kind of person that somehow, someday, I'm going to learn to control and enjoy my drinking. And if you've got those two things, if you've got that strange, peculiar reaction to alcohol, that phenomenon of craving or that allergy, coupled with the fact that you think somehow, someday you're going to learn to control and enjoy your drinking, probably alcoholic. And my friend Wayne Butler says, a lot of alcoholics die somewhere between probably and definitely. And that's why that thing that happens for us in step 1 is so critically important. It's not raising my hand in the meeting. It's that when the heat's off and I've got a little distance from alcohol and I've got some clarity, I can look in the mirror and I can say that I can concede to my innermost self that I have this thing. And I didn't understand that when I was drinking. And I certainly didn't understand it when I was new to Alcoholics Anonymous. I didn't understand that 2-part problem that is on that side of the M- in the first step. And then I got this other thing that's on the other side of the M-, that unmanageability, that thought life unmanageability, those defects of character, that fixation on self. And those are the 3 things that I didn't understand when I was actively drinking, and I certainly didn't understand it early in my sobriety. And I started drinking when I was 12 years old. Neighbor kid and I got a hold of a bottle of Chivas Regal. I was a top shelf drinker right out of the gate, Scott. But like I told you, it ended up with box wine. And the reason why it ended up with box wine is because it's cheap and it would last. Because see, when I take the drink takes the drink, and I'm off and running, and I gotta have alcohol. And so we got a hold of that bottle. We got good and drunk. They poured me onto my mother's porch in Granada Hills, California. And she came out and she looked down at me and she said this thing, "Timothy Carl, what are we going to do with you?" And she would say that for 27 years. I think about what I put her through. And I didn't drink that way every day for the, rest of my drinking. But when I could get a hold of alcohol, I'd get a hold of alcohol. And so I got through junior high school. Derek probably knows it as middle school. Can't be that old. But you got 22 months, don't you? That's a big deal. That's a big deal. I'm standing up here. I got this nice sport coat on. I got this nice tie. This is one of Dave's ties. Carol Mulvey gave me this tie for Christmas. It's Dave Barge's tie. But I got this sport coat from Goodwill because I give sport coats to my guys so that when they go to the podium, they can be an example of what Alcoholics Anonymous has done for them, right? And so I was getting these really nice sport coats for these fellas. And I was looking at the rack, and I noticed there was a 42 short there, and I got a guy who's a 42 short, and I looked at the label, and I had to decide, after buying a whole lot of expensive sport coats in my life, maybe I ought to just keep this one for me, right? Because selfishness never leaves me, And so anyway, I really love this sport coat. It's a good look on me. I got a blue one, right? I got a whole suit there for $39. I spent $150 having it tailored because don't you know I got to look pretty good from the podium. So I started running with these kids in high school, and they a bunch of baseball players, and one of them was my hero. And he was the kind of fella, he would go anywhere. The future was bright, and it was all just right there. And, he always had a six-pack of Bud Talls in the front, and he always had a six-pack of Bud Talls in the trunk. And we would go down into Los Angeles and go to the football games, and we just, it was just a fabulous time in my life. And then on March 20th of 1978, Ken was standing in the driveway of his mother's house in Granada Hills, and he took a .22 round to the bridge of his nose, and he was killed that night. And it struck me. It affected me. It affected me harder than it seemed to affect the other kids. And, people had passed, but they were all old. And here was an 18-year-old kid whose life was snatched from him in an instant. I drank that whole week at his mother's house. About 6 months later, November of 1978, I'd taken a girl home from a party because she needed to be home because her dad was probably worried about me. Another one that I couldn't talk to, drunk or sober, comfortably. And I drove back to that party, and it was in San Fernando, California, and I found a parking space about 6 car lengths from the fence line and 3 more houses, and I'd been in the party, and walking towards the party, I got to the fence line, and there were 6 or 8 fellas that wanted to have a conversation with me. And I took a bottle to this shoulder, and I went down a bit, and I took a knife to my back. And Norm Alpe, a great speaker in Alcoholics Anonymous, talked about seconds and inches. Seconds and inches, Norm would talk about. Particularly, he was talking about a car crash that happened in Los Angeles in the early 1950s. But what Norm was talking about was that idea that a lot of us just seem to get through these scrapes. We just seem to get by. Some of us get picked off, but, most of us just seem to be, we get beat up, or we get scratched up, or we get tore up to the neck, but not all the way to the neck up. But we get through it. And that night it was seconds and inches for me. And instead of going down, I popped up. And I ran to the car, and I got in the car, and I drove over to Holy Cross Memorial Hospital in the San Fernando Valley over there on Rinaldi Street. And I went into the emergency room, and I was incorrigible. I was not cooperative because I was drunk. I shouldn't have been driving that girl home. I shouldn't have been driving back. And I was drunk that night, and while they were looking at me to figure out what was wrong, a couple of patrol officers came in from the Los Angeles Police Department, 2 fellas in blue. They had some questions for me, and I didn't have any answers because I was drunk. And they left, and it was about that time that my lung collapsed, and they admitted me to that hospital. And I was in there for 3 days. On the 3rd day, there she was sitting in the corner. She had that look on her face, that frustration, that bewilderment, that confusion. Is it something we did? Is it the way we raised them? What's wrong with this kid? I knew what she was thinking. Timothy Carl, what are we going to do with you? About that time, 2 detectives came in from the Los Angeles Police Department, fellas in suits. They looked a lot like Derek. And they had the same questions for me. Did you recognize any of these fellas? Could you pick them out of a lineup? Did you get any names? And I already told you I was drunk. I couldn't remember nothing. And then they said this, those 2 detectives. We suggest you go back to school. We suggest you forget this ever happened. Because these are the kind of fellas who don't like witnesses, and there's absolutely nothing we can do to protect you. And I'm old enough to have been raised on Dragnet and Adam 12. To protect and to serve. And these were the folks who were supposed to keep us safe from all of you. And it was at that moment that I think for the first time I had that sense. I was just running on borrowed time. I was just running on borrowed time. That I needed to get what I wanted, and I wanted it as often as I could get it. Selfishness, self-centeredness, dishonesty, and fear. And that became progressively worse. Because the drinking was already out of control, and it wasn't going to get any better for a really long time. But that idea that I needed to get what I want as often as I could get it was the thing that drove me in my life. When I got out of high school and I got into a decent university, I was the 5th of 5. My folks are not from New York. They're from outside of Philadelphia. Nothing wrong with New York, but, Philadelphia, we kind of like our town too. And I did end up living in Bridgewater Township for a time. I was about this tall. And they were good people. They were good people. But I drank my way into UCLA, and I drank my way out of UCLA, 5th of 5. By the first year I was gone. My dad was disappointed. The things that I did to my mother and the things that I did to my father. But don't you know it was all their fault? I didn't want to go in the first place. That wasn't for me. I got a job as a catering truck mechanic in Van Nuys, California. I was perfectly happy working there. I got to see part of the world the way it really works, the darker side. And I was there for a time, and I ended up, just like I said, I'm one of those that dust themselves off and get back at it. I ended up going back to school. I was going to night school while I had that job at Pierce College in Woodland Hills. I ended up going back down. I got back into a university down in San Diego. I ended up getting a professional degree, and my drinking was all the way. I was getting drunk as often as I could get drunk. I got out of that school in Sacramento and I came back down to Newport Beach, California, and I found her a suitable victim. Because she drank the way I drank. And we got married, and it was a wonderful relationship for a very short period of time. It wasn't long, but there was a note on the kitchen counter. It was one of those notes. See, I drank the way she drank, and she drank the way I drank, but she was the first one to get the note out on the counter. And it was one of those notes that said, I can't do this anymore, and she was talking about our marriage. And soon after that, most of the furniture was gone, and the dogs were gone, and all that was left was the unpaid credit card bills and the defaulted mortgage. And I had this friend, we were drinking buddies. He was the best man in our wedding, and I was the best man in their wedding. And he was the kind of drinker you wanted to have around when you were drinking. He's the kind of fellow who had a bottle of Jägermeister in his freezer. Because, you know, when the bars are closed and the liquor stores are closed, and you're the kind of person who, when you take the drink takes the drink, and you're off and running. And he was that way, and so was I. And he would do this thing, though. He would disappear for like 30 days. And I couldn't find him to go drinking. Wouldn't return my calls. And then he'd come back and we'd do some drinking. And then he'd disappear for like 60 days. And then he'd come back and we'd do some drinking. And then he'd disappear for like 90 days. And then he came back. We'd do some drinking. And then he never came back to drink again. And my wife called me up on the 11th of February of 2002, and she asked me if I'd come down to the house that she was staying at in Aliso Viejo, California, 19 Tanglewood. Still remember where that is. I go by sometimes to pinch myself just to know that it was all real. And I said I'd go down to that house. I went down to that house and we did some drinking. And she was telling me how she couldn't do this thing anymore. But see, now she wasn't talking about our marriage. She was talking about she couldn't do this thing called life anymore. And she was at that thing that we call the jumping off place. She couldn't live with it and she couldn't live without it. And we ended up going to bed or passing out or whatever, blacking out. I woke up the next morning and I couldn't find her in the house. And I went downstairs and I opened up the sliding glass door and I looked to my left and I saw her. She was crouched at the air conditioning compressor with a cigarette in one hand and a pale orange juice in the other. And if you be alcoholic, you know what that pale orange juice is at 7 a.m. And I asked her, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm getting ready for work." And that's the way she'd been getting ready for work for a really, really long time. And we had a conversation, and she asked me if I'd take her to see her physician. And I said yes, because she was not doing well. We would see each other on and off in the preceding months, and she was not well physically, and she wasn't well mentally. And she asked me to take her to her doctor, and I took her down to her doctor, and the doctor was in there for about 45 minutes, came out and sat down with me and asked me, "Do you have any idea how much your wife's drinking?" I didn't have any idea how much I was drinking. There are people who count, but they're in a different meeting. And the doctor handed me a piece of paper. It was a yellow script. It had one word on it, and it said detox. And my heart stopped. Not because she might have to go to detox and not because she might have to go to the hospital, and not because she might have to stop drinking. But you see, if she stopped drinking, I might have to stop drinking, and that scared the daylights out of me. Because I'd been running my life for 27 years using alcohol as a crutch to get through the challenges and the disappointments and the successes. We went back to that house at 19 Tanglewood, and she was upstairs and she was getting her things together to go to detox, and I got on the phone and I called a friend. I called that guy who disappeared for 30 days and 60 days and 90 days because I knew what he was doing. He was relapsing, but he was going to see the people of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he kept coming back. And on that day, February 12th, 2002, he knew that anytime, anywhere someone reaches out for help, he wanted the hand of AA to be there, and for that, he was responsible. Took my call, said I'll be right over. Found out later that he told his employer he had something really important to do. And I went outside from the house. I went into the front yard at 19 Tanglewood, and I was standing. There's a big palm tree there. It's still there. I go by, like I told you, to pinch myself, just to know it was all real. And I was standing under that palm tree, and I had the sense of being wrapped in a warm blanket. And I heard a voice, not my own voice or a voice from the outside, but just a soft voice. And all it said was, it's going to be different, but it's going to be okay. And I know today that that's a spiritual experience, that flash of brilliance or that moment of clarity where the window opens just a little bit and you might get through it. It's the thing that gets us to the detox. It's the thing that gets us to the meeting. It's the thing that gets us to the club. It's the thing that gets us to the glum lot meeting, or the not a glum lot meeting. But I know now that spiritual experience is fleeting. Our founders knew that too. Because if you read the first edition of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12th step is different. In the first edition, it says, having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, but they changed it for the second, the third, the fourth, and probably the fifth. Now it says, having had a spiritual awakening. And I know today what that difference is. That spiritual awakening is that idea or that thought or that concept that it's more important that I do for you than I do for myself. That what's going on here is self-sacrifice and constructive selfless action. That it's not so much about the drinking, but it's about my thinking. That my job here is to be useful and purposeful as an agent of God in whatever form I conceive it, or him or her, so that I can be available for Paul, and I can be available for Mark, and I can be available for the people who are suffering, with 5 years and 10 years and 15 years and 20 years. And I didn't understand that when I got to Alcoholics Anonymous. Fella that, we got her to the detox, and in order to see her, I had to go to a family group meeting on the following Thursday. So I showed up at that family group meeting with a dozen roses, because don't you know I was going to fix my marriage. It was Valentine's Day. And that's the night she told me she was never coming home. But I went back to that family group meeting, and I went back again, and the fella that ran that thing said, all these people come in here and they complain about their loved one and they're drinking. And you come in here and you talk about how alcohol has absolutely obliterated any value in living for you. Why don't you call that guy you called on February the 12th and see if he'll take you to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous? And that's what I did. Willingness met the absence of it. I hit a bottom. I didn't understand it that day, and I certainly didn't understand it in my early sobriety. I thought it was consequences. I thought it was, for some of us, bankruptcy, some of us divorce, some of us the Internal Revenue Service. So they lost the job, kids are mad at me. It was none of those things. The bottom is where willingness meets the absence of it, because that's where I put down the shovel and I lift my hand up for the good people of Alcoholics Anonymous, doing God's work to lift me out, to show me the way out. And I did it. Called that guy, he took me to a meeting. And the problem is I just went to meetings and I didn't drink no matter what. And I just went to meetings and I didn't drink no matter what. And I just went to meetings and I didn't drink no matter what. And she was gone. So I found a suitable replacement. But see, I forgot to tell her that I did my own tax returns. So 5 years into my sobriety, doing my own tax returns on guesses and estimates and not making quarterlies. It's $165,000 short. The next year I made some considerable improvements. It was only $58,000. And then I married her, not telling her at all. Next year it was a significant amount of money and it just started to pile up. And I was just going to meetings, not drinking no matter what. I did a 3-column inventory and I concluded that it was all your fault. Just like it says in the book. By 2018, it was $750,000. And I got a notice. See, they'd been sending me letters for years telling me how much I owed them. And I'd put it with it would say that I owed them tens of thousands of dollars, and I'd put them with these little letters I'd get from the Social Security Administration, and the numbers didn't match, so they went in the same box. And then I got a notice from them. It was an audit notice. And fear gripped me. Quicksand spread out all around me. The walls were closing in. Because I knew if they did an audit, it'd be another $250,000. It was March of 2018. I hadn't had a drink in 16 plus years. Completely without any sense of what we're supposed to be doing here. And I started to think about them. Because see, when I was in the United States Naval Reserve, in order to get from San Diego to Coronado Island, you got to go over the Coronado Bay Bridge. And my friend Carl M. talks about talking a man off of that bridge. And when you go from Long Beach into San Pedro, you got to go over the Vincent Thomas Bridge, and that bridge started to come into my head. And then the other bridge started to come into my head, because in 1967, my sister Vicky, my oldest sister Vicky, and I were in the back seat of the station wagon. The rest of the kids were in the middle section of the station wagon. My mom and dad were in the front. We were coming from Marin County into San Francisco, and my sister Vicky and I watched a lady jump off the Golden Gate Bridge. And the image of that woman jumping off that bridge was coming into my head. And I was actively entertaining the idea of taking my own life. I wasn't thinking about taking a drink. Because see, I couldn't come back to face you. I'm not as brave as, at least I don't think I'm as brave as those people who keep coming back. Just like that fella that saved my life. I was driving down Barranca in Orange County, and this thought came into my head. Call Mitch. Mitch is a fella in Alcoholics Anonymous who talks his truth. And he had trouble, financial trouble. He was a successful businessman and things went the wrong way, and he ended up stacking chips in grocery stores. And not being afraid to tell people that he was doing the best he could. Because he was actively sponsoring men in Alcoholics Anonymous. And being honest about his circumstance. And willingness met the absence of it. I called him that day. I said, what's going on? I told him. I hadn't told anybody. And he said, when's the last time you done a fear list? I'd never done a fear list. He said, I want you to write down everything you're afraid of, and I want you to call me back and tell me what it is. Are you willing to do that? And I was willing to do that because willingness had met the absence of it. And I wrote it down. She's going to leave. They're going to take the house. I'm going to lose my professional license. I'm going to federal prison. And when I get out, nobody's going to like me. I called him up, I read it to him, and he said the most profound thing I've ever heard in Alcoholics Anonymous, at exactly the moment I needed to hear it. All he said was, is any of that going to happen by 5 o'clock? And I said, no. And he said, let's just aim for midnight. And we've been doing it all along. We've been doing it here all along. I want to read something to you. Some of this will sound familiar. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace, taking as he did this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that he will make all things right if I surrender to his will, so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with him forever in the next. Amen. Until I got busy in Alcoholics Anonymous, I had no idea that's where we got one day at a time. And that's all Mitch was asking me to do, was to take it one day at a time. And so we got busy. He had me do this first step narrative based upon some of the readings we'd done in the big book, but also from page 23 of the 12 and 12, where it says we went back through our drinking careers to see where we really lost control, where it had become more than a luxury, it had become a fatal progression. Because he wanted me to see that when I take the drink takes the drink, I'm off and running. He wanted me to see that I always thought it was going to be different next time. Because don't you know, somehow, someday, I'm going to learn to control and enjoy the Internal Revenue Service. And sprinkled throughout that were my defects of character, my thought life unmanageability. That I always needed to get what I wanted, when I wanted it, as often as I could get it. We talked about 2 and we talked about 3. We went through the inventories as described in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. He showed me the instructions for the inventory for the resentments, why I was so angry. And he showed me in there that I was to do 3 columns, and then I was to draw a bold line. And I was to say that sick man prayer for those people on that list, so that I be divorced of all the malice, ill will, and the hatred that I have for those folks, so I can see with clarity with what Dr. Paul said, which is this: not so much what needs to be changed in the world, but what needs to be changed in me and in my attitudes. Then he showed me how I was going to do a fear inventory. I was going to do a fear list. He wanted me to write down the things that I was afraid of, and then I was to write numbers, and I was to number them again. I was supposed to say whether it was real or if it was imagined. And if it was imagined, I was to ask God to remove it immediately, because there's no sense being afraid of monsters under your bed. And then he said, if it's real, panic. He didn't say that, Derek. He said, if it's real, we're going to make a plan. We're going to ask God for the knowledge of His will for us. We're going to make a plan. And then we're going to implement that plan, and we're going to ask God for the power to carry it out. And then we looked at the 9 questions on page 69, and he said this has very little to do with the way you like to have sex. This is about how you manipulate people into doing things they might not otherwise want to do. So I want you to write down the names of every person you've been in a significant relationship, whether it was intimate or not, because we're looking for your defects of character. And we got on our knees on Laguna Canyon Road in front of the Canyon Club at 6:45 a.m. We clasped our hands and we said the prayer. We said the 3rd step prayer. And he turned me loose. And I did those inventories. And I went back and I read it to him. We talked about my defects of character. We formulated what amends I needed to make for that wife and for the IRS. And that plan was to get an outside bookkeeper and get a CPA and get an interface for the Internal Revenue Service. Get yourself a tax lawyer. Not because you're going to go to federal prison because you weren't, but because you'll sleep at night. And he told me, he said, listen to these professionals. Take this out of your hands and put it in theirs. And with all that time you have now that you're not worrying about yourself, get busy in Alcoholics Anonymous. He had me get commitments. I got a commitment at my Saturday night speaker meeting. I became a basket case, just the way Patty Ochoa used to tell me. Patty also told me that she said, Tim, you're lucky you didn't get what you deserved, because a guy like you would get 2 years in the electric chair. And I went to that meeting with Patty and my other friends at the Saturday night speaker meeting. And I got other commitments. I ended up with the commitment coordinator. I ended up the secretary. I ended up getting the speakers. I got busy in general service. I was a GSR. I was a secretary for the district. I was the alt DCMC. I got an area commitment where I got to go to all the conventions. And I paid the IRS back a little bit at a time because the accountants and the lawyers said, how much are you paying those people? I said, I'm not paying them. They'll figure out where I live. And they said, they know where you live. And so I paid them a little bit at a time, and I became better at what I do because I was focused on others and not on me. And it hasn't been perfect. But then they started to show up. Hey, I heard about the IRS and the situation with the wife. Understand you did the steps with Mitch. Will you do the steps with me? And 1 became 2, and 2 became 3, and 3 became 4, and then they started to get sponsees. And the fellowship has grown up around me. And they accept me for who I am. And I'm not afraid anymore that somebody's not going to like me. That doesn't mean that there aren't people who don't like me. But they get to have their own life, and I get to have mine. And I'm reasonably comfortable in my own skin. And for that, I'm grateful. I want to read this to you. Because we just had Christmas. And I really, really like this. This is from the Grapevine, December 1952. The first Christmas for AA was the Depression year of 1935. There were 3 old-timers to market, hardly a dozen newcomers to share it with them. In New York, Bill W. had 13 months since his last drink, 7 months since his historic trip to Akron, and the start of AA. Wilson recalls only a quiet day in New York, that Yule of 35, where there were very few involved. But in Akron, Dr. Bob and Bill D. were going on their second 6 months. 4 recruits had from 2 months to 4 months. The Akron 6 gathered with their families at Dr. Bob's. There was no ceremony, no exchange of presents. The 12 steps had not yet been formulated. The big book was only a vague stirring that would not even be in manuscript until 3 more Christmases had been achieved. But there was joy that this most dangerous of times for the alcoholic had arrived, and 24 hours by 24 hours was being mastered. There was thanks, remembers one of the 2 who survives that first Akron Christmas. that we had come this far. However, I am certain that there was still considerable fear and trembling. Not fear that this new way would not work, but doubt and uncertainty that we would be able to hold on to it. We remembered our many failures and thanked God for what he had already granted us and prayed sincerely for continued strength to meet the challenges that lie ahead. I'll tell you this, I don't come to Alcoholics Anonymous anymore to get a life beyond my wildest dreams. I come to Alcoholics Anonymous so the two fellas back there and the people that walk through that door can have a life beyond their wildest dreams. My name's Tim Ayers. I'm an alcoholic. Thanks for letting me share.